The retirees with the most money in the bank are not the ones who thrive in retirement, not by a long way. The data is unusually clear on this, and the ones who do thrive have something else entirely. Three things that almost nobody plans for before they leave the office. Three things that decide whether the next 30 years of your retirement are the best part of your life or the loneliest. And the research that proves it goes back 8 decades. In this episode of Your Independent Years, we'll show you what the data says. But before we get to what the data says, you first need to see the typical scenario. Imagine John. He's 64 years old, and for 38 years, he had somewhere to be. An alarm at 6, a drive to the office, a nameplate on the door, people who knew him by his work, and a calendar that told him every single day exactly what he was for. And then, on a Friday afternoon in his 64th year, it ended. Goodbyes at the door, a card from the team, a walk to the parking lot for the last time, and then Monday. Monday was the part nobody warned him about. The house was quiet. The phone didn't ring. There was no meeting at 9, no problem to solve, no one calling him by his title. For the better part of 40 years, 8 hours of every working day belonged to somebody else. The job, the team, the role, and on one specific Monday morning, all 8 of those hours come back at once. 8 hours, with nothing in them, and nobody told him what to do with them. He'd thought about the money. He'd planned for the health care. He'd looked at his savings, his benefits, his timing. He had done everything the books told him to do, and he was still completely unprepared for the question that arrived on Monday morning. Who am I now? This question, the one almost nobody talks about before retirement, has a name in the research. The doctors who study it call it retirement syndrome. And what they've found over the last 30 years is more sobering than most people realize. In the general adult population, somewhere between 7 and 10 people out of every 100 experience depression. Among retirees, according to a peer-reviewed analysis pulling together every major study on the subject, that number is 28. Nearly 1 in 3, 28%. The peer-reviewed studies are clear, and the number is consistent across cultures and continents. Retirement does something to the human mind that working life had been quietly protecting it from. In the first few years after leaving work, self-reported depression rises by about 40%. Not slowly, not later. Right away. In the very window most people thought would be the freest of their lives, and almost nobody saw it coming. Because the brochures all show smiling couples on beaches, not a Tuesday in March when the silence feels louder than the alarm clock used to. And the silence has a name too. The Surgeon General of the United States, the country's chief medical officer, issued a formal advisory in 2023 on something most people don't think of as a medical condition at all. Loneliness. The Surgeon General's advisory didn't just call loneliness sad, it called it dangerous, because what the research had been showing for over a decade is that loneliness doesn't just hurt your feelings, it hurts your body. In a landmark meta-analysis led by Dr. Julianne Holt-Lundstad, pulling together studies on over 3 million people, loneliness was linked to a 26% increase in the risk of dying early. Social isolation, 29%. And the Surgeon General's advisory put it in a sentence ordinary people could feel. The harm to your body from being alone is comparable to smoking up to 15 cigarettes every day. And living alone, which is the reality for many retirees, especially after the loss of a spouse, pushed the risk higher still. 32%. Higher than smoking. Higher than obesity. higher than nearly anything else medicine knows how to measure. Same risk as smoking. Without lighting a single match, without the cough, without the warning label, quietly, year after year. And here is the part most people miss. The job that someone retired from on Friday afternoon was the single biggest source of daily human contact they had had for almost 40 years. 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. People who knew their name, people who asked how their weekend was, people who needed something from them. On Monday morning, all of that was gone. Not reduced, not adjusted. Gone. And nobody had prepared the calendar for what to put in its place. But loneliness was only the first cost, because the same studies that were tracking heart rates and blood pressure were also tracking something even more personal: the brain. Researchers at Rush University in Chicago have followed more than 1,500 older adults for over 20 years, measuring everything from memory to attention to risk of dementia. And they kept finding the same pattern in study after study. The retirees with the lowest sense of purpose, the ones who felt their lives no longer pointed anywhere, were 2.4 times more likely to develop Alzheimer's disease than the retirees with the highest sense of purpose. Even when the researchers adjusted for age, for education, for income, for genetic risk. It wasn't the years that were aging them. It was the silence in those years. And the people who carried the heaviest cost were the ones who walked out of the office on Friday and had no plan for Monday, who assumed that rest, finally, would be enough. That after 38 years of being needed somewhere, not being needed anywhere would feel like a gift. In a separate study of nearly 20,000 American adults over 50, stronger purpose was linked to a 28% lower risk of cognitive decline. 28%. Just from one variable. And the cruel thing about losing purpose is that it doesn't announce itself. There's no diagnosis on a Monday. There's just one quiet morning, then another, until the calendar has months in it that nobody can quite remember. But there's a third part of the story that people only discover after retirement is already underway: the friends. Researchers studying social networks in retirement found that on average, within 5 years of leaving the workplace, retirees had lost roughly half of the friendships they once relied on, not because anyone was angry, not because of a falling out, just because the thing that brought them together every day was gone. The lunch invitations slowed. The group chats moved on. The people who used to share an office moved on to new colleagues, and the retiree was left holding a phone full of contacts that didn't quite know how to talk to her anymore. Half the friends, gone. And nobody had warned her that they would be. And here is what the researchers at Harvard, at Rush, at the Surgeon General's office, at the Health and Retirement Study, all kept finding when they followed retirees over time. The ones who thrived weren't the ones who saved the most. They weren't the ones who retired the earliest. They weren't the ones with the biggest house or the best benefits. They were the ones who replaced. In 1938, long before the word retirement meant what it means today, a team of researchers at Harvard University started something they called the Harvard Study of Adult Development. They wanted to know one thing: what makes a human life go well? They began with 268 young men. They followed them, their children, their grandchildren, for more than 80 years. It is the longest study of adult life ever conducted. And after 8 decades of data, the single clearest predictor of a long, healthy, satisfying life wasn't money, wasn't career success, wasn't fame. It was the quality of a person's relationships, not how many people they knew, not how often they posted online. Just one thing. Whether they had people in their lives they could turn to, people who knew them, people they had built something with, people who were still there when the job wasn't. And every other study, the depression numbers, the loneliness numbers, the cognitive numbers, the friendship numbers, they all pointed to the same three words: connection, purpose, identity. The three things that the workplace had been silently providing for 38 years. And the retirees who built those three things back, on purpose, deliberately, in the first months of their independent years, didn't just feel better. The data shows they lived longer. In a 14-year study, retirees with a strong sense of purpose were about half as likely to die during the study period as retirees with a weak one. Half. Just from having something worth getting up for. And the threshold the researchers found wasn't dramatic. About 100 hours a year of meaningful engagement, volunteering, mentoring, teaching, contributing, was enough to show measurable health benefits. 100 hours. That's 2 hours a week. 2 hours a week. The bar wasn't high. The cost was never the money. The cost was always the question: what will you build? There's a phrase the researchers use to describe the retirees who do this well. They don't say they retired. They say they reorganized. They kept the calendar. They kept the people. They kept the reason. They just changed what filled them. The job didn't define them after all, but the structure the job provided. They had to build that themselves, on their terms, with what mattered to them. And the research, across decades, across countries, across studies, kept coming back to the same three ingredients: connection, at least one new community; purpose, at least one weekly contribution; identity, at least one new way to introduce yourself to the people you haven't met yet. The job was one chapter, a long one, a good one, a chapter that paid the mortgage, raised the children, and built the savings. But it was one chapter, not the whole book. The question on Monday morning wasn't really, who am I now that I've lost what I was? It was, who am I free to become, now that the script has finally ended? The retirees who answered that question on purpose, early, deliberately, were the ones who didn't just survive their independent years. They built them. 28% depression, 2.4 times the Alzheimer's risk, half the mortality reduction, 3 different studies, 3 different research teams, 3 different decades, all pointing to the same problem and to the same answer. Money was always going to be one part of the plan. But the people who navigated this well didn't just plan their finances. They planned their Mondays. They planned who they'd be when the office door closed behind them for the last time. The plan isn't just for the money. The plan is also for the 8 hours that come back to you on Monday morning, for the friendships that won't replace themselves, for the purpose that nobody else is going to assign to you, ever again. The first chapter of your independent years isn't about what you stop doing. It's about what you decide to start. And the data is unusually clear on this one. The retirees who thrived didn't wait for the question to find them. They answered it first. Your independent years are not what comes after your life. They are the part of your life where you finally get to choose what it's for. But the plan for who you'll be still sits alongside the plan for the money. Because the 7 biggest mistakes people make with their retirement savings can quietly cost them everything they spent 40 years building. And those are where we'll go next. If this was useful, subscribe. Every Tuesday and Saturday, we cover what retirement actually takes. Money, health, purpose, the full picture. See you there.